Happy Freya's Day, everyone, and welcome to Pagan Happy Hour. Thank you so much for joining us. If this is your first time here, welcome. I do Pagan Happy Hour every Friday at 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Eastern. And it's a great way for us pagans to connect, to share a drink together, skull, and to talk about a different pagan topic. And we have a different topic each week. And this week and today, we are talking about Norse magic, specifically an ancient form of Norse magic called Seidr. So that's what we're going to be going over today. But if you are new here, I will be looking over this direction. I will be looking through your comments. I will be bringing in your thoughts, your ideas into the discussion as well. So of course, feel free to comment as we're going along here, as we're chatting, so I can bring in your thoughts as well. And if you do enjoy Pagan Happy Hour or my channel, there are two great ways you can support the show. The first way is through my Patreon, which I have linked down below in the description. If you choose to join, you gain access to my exclusive Discord community, which is a great place to meet and chat with fellow pagans and share resources and links and videos and knowledge and all that kind of fun stuff. And the other great way you can support the show is through Super Chats, which is the $ button at the bottom of the chat box. And through that, you can donate any amount and your comment or question will pop up really big for me. So I'll be sure to bring your thoughts, your questions, your ideas into the conversation. So now that we got that out of the way, why don't you in the comments tell me where you happen to be watching from and what you are drinking tonight. So let me cue that drink music. So I am just drinking some beer in my Pagan Happy Hour mug. Got my Thor's hammer here, so very appropriate for today. But let me see where you guys are chiming in from. It looks like we have people watching from Colorado, from Wisconsin, Minnesota, Romania, Italy, England, Indiana, let's see, DC, India, Pennsylvania, Idaho, Illinois, Antarctica. Are you for real with that one? Let's see, we got people chiming in from Finland, Toledo, North Dakota, Texas, Denmark, Ontario, Virginia, UK, and New Mexico. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. This has been a topic I've been wanting to do a Pagan Happy Hour episode on for a while, but you guys hadn't picked it yet in the poll. So I kept on adding it to future polls, and I'm so glad to see that you guys finally picked this one. So we're going to jump into Norse magic today. And let me stop that drink music. I'll have a sip of my beer, and we're going to dig into it. Okay, so now, when we talk about Norse magic, this is a pretty wide-ranging topic, right? So we're not going to cover the entirety of Norse magic today. I wanted to just focus on Seidr, which is a particular type of Norse pagan magic. Now, in future Pagan Happy Hours, maybe we'll do one on sigils or staves or maybe runes. I think I've done a couple Pagan Happy Hours on runes before. So there's a lot of different ways that we could approach Norse magic. So today, I think we're just going to stick mostly with Seidr, which is very fascinating in my opinion. And we're going to focus on some historical stuff. So a lot of the Norse pagan magic books that you might buy in a bookstore nowadays, often they don't really contain a lot of the historical information. So that's what I want to kind of cover today. So we're going to dig into what Seidr is, who practiced it, and how it was practiced. And again, keep in mind, we don't have that much information. I'm primarily going to be using texts like the Poetic and Prose Edda and a few songs and, some stuff like that as research. But most of that stuff was written after the Viking Age, after the Christianization of the region. So, of course, it's filled with bias. It's not entirely accurate because, unfortunately, they didn't write that much down during the Viking Age or before that. So, we don't have that much material to work with. So, there's always going to be a certain level of guesswork when it comes to Norse paganism in general. I do have linked below a Jackson Crawford video that I used for some of the information we're going to be talking about today. He's one of the best scholars on both the ancient Norse language, Old Norse, but also Norse culture, Norse mythology, and history. So I highly recommend his YouTube channel, as well as his translations of the Eddas and the Havamal if you don't have a copy yet. I'm not sponsored or anything. I just really love his stuff. And he is such a wonderful resource for anyone who is interested in learning about Norse culture or Norse paganism. Let's see, a couple of comments coming in before we jump into it. Let's see, Casey is asking if I like the YouTuber Erith Hager. I've watched his videos. He seems pretty knowledgeable overall. So yeah, he's definitely more knowledgeable than me on this topic. I'm a bit of a jack of all trades when it comes to paganism. So I know a little bit about a lot of different pagan topics, but I'm not an expert in any of them. So always take what I say in my videos, in my episodes of Pagan Happy Hour with a grain of salt, because I'm just figuring this stuff out like you are. I'm doing my best. So let's see. Another person is asking if I'm Asatru. I don't consider myself Asatru. I know there are kind of specific aspects to being considered part of the Asatru community. I do consider myself a pagan who specializes in Norse paganism and Celtic paganism. I'm a bit eclectic here. So because of that, I don't fully consider myself Asatru. I also still celebrate the Wiccan Sabbats. I'm a bit all over the place, to be honest. So no, I do not consider myself Asatru. But, I definitely read some blogs, watch some videos from people that are Asatru on YouTube and things like that. Interesting question from Low Kitty here asking, do you have to be Norse to practice Norse paganism? In my opinion, you do not. I do think Norse paganism is open to those that it calls to, right? I think if you feel a calling to follow this path, then you are more than welcome to join. I know there's been some kind of exclusionary practices in certain Norse pagan communities, and I don't necessarily think that's right. So I really feel that Norse paganism is open to anyone that feels the call. Now, Norse paganism, like many other branches of paganism, does include ancestor veneration as a key component of it. So you do need to keep that in mind. That doesn't mean you can't be a Norse pagan. It just means you might be missing out on that particular aspect of Norse paganism if you choose to follow that path and you don't happen to have Scandinavian ancestry. Similarly, like with many of the other practices that have ancestor veneration, like voodoo, for example. Yes, you could still practice voodoo if you wanted, if you don't have any history or cultural connection, but you're never going to have the full picture, probably. So that's my opinion. But of course, it's always open to interpretation. There are no rules in paganism. We are all forging our own unique paths. But great question. Let's see. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that because there's all this controversy and stuff. And I think it's open to everyone. You just got to keep in mind that the ancestral magic piece and the ancestral veneration is part of that. So if you're okay with, skipping that part, and or not, that's fine. Whatever floats your boat for paganism. Let's see. Okay, so let's jump into it. Now, we're talking about Norse pagan magic here. Now, there's kind of two types of magic. There's Galdr and Seidr. Today, we're mostly talking about Seidr because Galdr is mostly different types of spells. It's a bit more generalized and it's a bit more of a lighter form of witchcraft. But today, we're going to be talking about the kind of a darker form of Norse magic called Seiðr. Now, it was a type of magic that many people were cautious of using. It's not just a simple form of magic that you do casually. It's a bit more intense. It's a bit of something you use for special occasions, and it's specifically something you would mostly use for divinatory purposes or for prophecy, for telling the future. Now, even the word Seidr means to bind. So there are a lot of curses and darker forms of magic that fall within this Seidr umbrella, which makes it interesting, right? But keep in mind, that's just one part of Norse magic. There are many different forms of Norse magic out there. Now, one interesting thing about this negative connotation associated with Seidr that is interesting is that Seidr is traditionally viewed as a woman's art, a woman's form of magic. So it wasn't considered necessarily negative when a woman practiced it. Where it would be considered negative would be if a man practiced Seidr. So it was kind of this specific feminine form of magic. Now, back in the day, in ancient Norse society, they had pretty strong gender roles. And there was a lot of shame that people would feel if they were to do something outside of their traditional gender role. Obviously, times have changed, which is great, but back then it was still pretty much defined what your role was. Now, that isn't to say that there weren't females doing traditionally male roles in society, or even there's some evidence that there might have even been female warriors, for example. But in general, it was considered very shameful for a man to practice Seidr. And we actually see this in stories of Odin, where Odin was actually really interested in Seidr and was criticized by Loki for doing a womanly magic that would somehow make him seem less masculine. So keep that in mind, that this negative connotation aspect doesn't necessarily apply to the magic system as a whole. More so, if a man were to try Seidr, this would be something very bad in society. So I wanted to bring that up because it's kind of interesting, the differences here between the different magic systems and how gender actually played a significant role in how the Norse people practiced magic. Sarah's got a funny comment in here. She says, Loki's one to talk about being less masculine. Good point there. Loki should not have been criticizing Odin there for sure. Yes. So let me see. Oh, we have a super chat here from FT Family Channel. Thank you so much. He says, I'm an author and my book has its own pantheon of gods. And since my school days, I've always loved mythology. It's a mixture of different religions in my book, and I love to study religions of the Egyptians, Greeks, Scandinavians, and Slavs. That's awesome. And I love writers and books that feature their own mythology or just their own kind of religious systems. It was one of the reasons I really liked Game of Thrones reading it, because they had all these different forms of magic and religion throughout the series based on different regions. So very cool. And thank you so much for that super chat. I see a comment here talking about the Warrior of Burka. So that's a town in Sweden where they uncovered quite a few female graves, and one of which they think might be a female warrior. And I think the archaeology is still mixed here. They're not quite sure if it is, if it isn't, but very exciting nonetheless. So now there was one god, or I should say goddess, that was in particular very influential with Seidr, and that was Freya. Freya was really the goddess who was believed to have given this magical art to the Aesir gods. So she is the one that we think women, Norse women who would practice Seidr, would be trying to kind of connect with. Or to honor through their magic practice. So if you are practicing Seidr, you're also kind of honoring Freya in a certain way because she's the one that brought humans and the gods this magic. So I think that's pretty cool. Let me see here. Okay. Now there's different names for someone who practiced Seidr. There's the Seith Kona, which just means Seidr woman. There's the Spa Kona, which is prophecy woman, which makes sense because Saturn is a large part based on prophecy or telling the future. And then finally, there's the Völva. Now, the Völva is the most common name you'll find when you research this topic. The Völva is a woman that practices Seidr. Oh, and I see we have a super chat from Johnstone. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So there's different terminology you might run into when you're researching this on your own, but for the most part, Völva is the main term. Now I'm pronouncing it right now Völva because this is YouTube and I don't want to get flagged, but the actual pronunciation sounds a bit more like a female body part if you catch my drift. But it doesn't come from that word. It actually comes from a separate word meaning staff. I believe it comes from the word volar. So Völva just means staff bearer, the one who holds the staff. And the Völva would carry a staff as a powerful magical weapon. Not weapon, magical tool. Guess it could be both, as part of her practice. So now when we talk about Seidr as a form of prophecy, correct me if I'm wrong on this in the comments, but I believed the Norse worldview or the Norse cosmology was such that your fate was fixed. The Norns already knew your fate. So the seerist or the Völva was able to tap into this knowledge because it was kind of already set in stone and would simply have to read that future that already was determined. So that's something to keep in mind too, and kind of tells you a lot about how they must have approached things like legacy and future and how you could change the future, if you could change the future. It would be pretty messed up if you believed that you couldn't change anything and it was all set in stone and you just kind of had to follow one path. There's some interesting comments here. Graves is mentioning that was the idea driving Odin, that the future Ragnarok was present and he wanted to know as much as possible. Oh, it was preset. Thank you. Yes. Can you imagine how terrifying that would be to know that the world is ending and to know that that is a fixed fact and there's nothing you can do about it and you just have to face your fate, as the Norse gods did in Ragnarok, knowing that the vast majority of them would die. So yeah, pretty fascinating and kind of inspiring that they still had such a, at least in the sagas with Odin, he was such a powerful warrior, even knowing that ultimately he and Thor and most of the Norse gods would die during Ragnarok, and there was nothing you could do to change it. So we know it's a form of prophecy. And it wasn't just used for prophecy. As I mentioned before, Seidr could be used to curse others. It could be also used in battle or for an upcoming battle, where the Völva would cast a curse or a spell to make the warriors weak or disoriented, thus kind of killing them just not as directly. So there were other ways to use this magical practice. But the vast majority of literature that is written about this and the information we do have is about Seidr being practiced as a form of prophecy. And there's very specific ways that this prophecy would take place, which is what we're going to get into next. So, so let's jump into it. Just checking your comments here. Let's see. Okay. So we know from the sagas that a Völva would be someone who would travel, was kind of like a traveling witch. And she would go from town to town, often invited by a wealthy family to go to their hall and to tell the future. And this was kind of a big deal. This was entertainment. So a feast would occur where the wealthy individual would both host the Völva, pay for a feast, pay the Völva, and invite all the villagers. Let's watch this. Let's see what happens. Let's see what future we can glean. Now, this might just occur just for fun because they want to know, or it might be before a big battle and they want to know the outcome of the battle or the outcome of their own particular future. So the Völva was very much a traveling woman, which is kind of interesting too when we think about that Odin was so in particular interested in Seidr. Odin is also the one who travels among the realm of men in Midgard. So it's kind of this like, you imagine, the cloak and the traveling from town to town. It almost has this like Odin vibe to me. Let me see. Oh, and I have another super chat from our FT family channel. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Let me see. Just checking your comments. Oh, Krishna has an interesting comment here. Saying, is it possible that Freya, as the goddess of love and war, that it kind of somehow made it more acceptable for women to become warriors in ancient Norse society? Good question, because Freya is such a fascinating, multifaceted goddess where she does have this connection to war as well as love. So that really differentiates her from goddesses that she's often compared to from other pantheons. Like Greek Aphrodite is quite a bit different than Norse Freya in actuality. And I wouldn't really interchange them. Freya is her own goddess, her own person, and is connected to quite a variety of different domains and traits. So, good question and good comment there. So we know most of this about the Völva from Eric the Red's saga. He has a full description of the Völva here to kind of give us a sense of what she wore, what she looked like, and how this process was done, which I think is really interesting for us modern pagans if we were trying to kind of craft a somewhat authentic version of this prophecy magic. We kind of need to know, how do they do it back in the day? So we know quite a few things from Eric the Red saga. We know that the Völva would wear a blue cloak that was covered with stones. Now, I don't know if these are just regular stones, if they're precious stones, possibly precious stones, because we know that the Völva was a magical practitioner that was paid. So it's possible she actually had a decent amount of money. She would also be wearing many strings of beads around her neck. Also, an indicator that this practice of telling the future actually, generated a decent amount of wealth. Now, on her head, she had a very interesting kind of hood. She would wear a black hood. Now, the hood was made with lambskin, but was lined with cat skin. Kind of creepy, right? And not only that, she had gloves that were also made of cat skin. Now, this is interesting and most likely a connection back to Freya. If you recall, Freya is very much connected to cats. In fact, she has a chariot that is driven by two cats. So it's possible that the cat skin she wears is kind of a homage or a way to honor Freya or to tap into Freya's power. Now, obviously, as modern day practitioners, we don't want to copy that exactly. That sounds horrible and horrifying, but it's just an interesting fact I thought I would share. Um, we also know that she would have a staff. Now, there are several different forms of this staff. After all, we know the term Völva means staff bearer. So, this staff must have been very important to her practice. I'm actually wearing a necklace that is a replica of a particular Völva staff. I actually linked below an archaeological site dig in the comments that you can click on if you're interested, and that'll show you several grave sites in Birka, Sweden, that they've uncovered of Völvas. So they each have their own kind of form of staff, and this was designed specifically on a staff they recovered from a grave site, but there are variations here. Some are mostly wood, some are wood with like a brass top and inlaid stones. They are pretty elaborate for the time, again, suggesting that she was considered an significant member and possibly very wealthy member of society. So I think that's pretty cool. And she was also known to be wearing a bag at her waist, tied at her waist. And in that bag, she would carry her talismans that would help her tell the future. Now, how exactly she used these talismans and what they looked like, unfortunately, we don't know. Now, you might ask yourself, were they runes? Probably not, actually. I have a video that I linked down below. Were runes used for divination? And we really don't have any evidence that runes were used during the divination process. It's possible, but it's also possible that other symbols were carved into most likely tree bark as part of that talismanic magic or that divinatory process. I wish we had more detail on that. It would be so cool to like recreate what was in that Völva's pouch. But at this point, we just don't know. Oh, and I see we have a super chat from Howard. Cheers. Thank you. Leah is asking, so were Völvas real life people? Yes, they were. These were women who practiced a form of magic or prophecy. There were several of them, and we have uncovered their grave sites, and we have several written records of them. So yes, there were real women, real people doing this. Let's see. Sarah is mentioning runes were an alphabet, probably no different than writing out a spell in English. Yes, exactly. The runes were used as their writing system. Now, there are a couple examples of runes being used for spells, but not many. The vast majority of runic inscriptions we have are on what are basically tombstones. They're these large stones that are actually called rune stones. So if you go to Scandinavia today, you'll visit probably several rune stones. They're not the tiny little things you buy on Etsy. And what they have is a large inscription, usually about an important member in society, kind of listing their accomplishments. Yeah, we don't really know too much about what the Völva was carrying. If they were runes, if they were not runes, probably not. Let's see. And then another super chat here mentioning about how similar gods in different mythologies. As an example, Perun, the god of thunder, and Thor in the Norse world. And yes, this is very true. And it's something I think about a lot. Now, there are some close comparisons, and Perun and Thor is definitely one of them. But other ones like Freya and Aphrodite don't quite match as much. Though at the same time, I think there is this kind of universality about certain archetypes, which is why you see somewhat similar gods being represented in different ways throughout all the cultures in the world. Basically, every single pagan society, which is pretty much all cultures at one point were either animist or pagan before monotheism got in there. They pretty much all had a god of war and a goddess of love and things like that. So there is some type of archetypal truth that we can understand better when we look at multiple pantheons and multiple cultures in ancient societies. So that's a good point. Let's see. Leah has a good question. How were Völvas chosen? This is a good one. Now, it is believed that often they were daughters of a Völva. So it's kind of something that you would pass that knowledge down to your children. So I don't know beyond that. So it's probably your mother was one, or in the off chance, maybe you were mentored by one. It definitely wasn't as much of an organized system as you might see in something like Druidry in the Celtic pagan world, where that was like a whole big thing with like basically an ancient university people would go to be trained in the Druid arts. Not as intense for us Völvas in the Norse world, right? Let's see. And Howard has a great point here in the comments. He mentions Völva were originally mainly Sami people. And this is most likely true. Now, the Sami are a different ethnic group that are more in the kind of Siberian range. Their language is more closely associated to like Finnish and Estonian and Bulgarian than Old Norse. But they did obviously interact very often with the Old Norse people. And yes, they did have quite a big impact. And it was believed that the Sami kind of had this magical power, and they were viewed as the experts in Seidr. And in fact, in one of those grave sites of a Völva that they dug up recently, they found a drum, which was a bit unusual. You don't usually see drums, and it's likely that was an influence from the Sami tradition of prophecy and magic. So yes, they were considered the pros. They were the ones the Völvas would turn to for advice and help and guidance. So they were always kind of considered these people with great magical ability. So they're very fascinating. Something I want to look into more is the Sami people and their culture and their magic. So yeah, that's a great point and a great question. So now we talked a bit about what the Völva looked like in terms of her cloak, her, cat skin gloves, her staff, her jewels, her beads. Now this meal that she went to, though, because remember, this prophecy that she would be giving was an event. Everyone wanted to watch and see what happened. So she would eat a special meal right before the prophecy takes place. Now, this is a really gross sounding meal, so get ready for it. She would eat a special porridge that had the hearts of many animals in it. So that doesn't sound very appetizing. But of course, back in the day and still today, some people eat the hearts of different animals. Now, it's interesting that they mention the hearts of like many different animals, or even some translations say all the animals, like they were just eating all of these different animal hearts in their porridge. And at the same time, she's wearing a lot of different animal hides and skins. So maybe there was this idea that by the consuming and the wearing of the animal, she was somehow tapping into the power of those animals. So that's kind of interesting. I did read, which I don't know if this is necessarily true, that it would be 9 animals or 9 hearts of the animals that she would be eating in her porridge. It's 9 was definitely a magic and a sacred number in Norse society. So maybe there was something to be said about 9 hearts or 9 different skins of animals that she would wear as a way to kind of tap into that. But obviously, as modern pagans, I don't recommend eating the hearts of animals. That's kind of gross. Though, I mean, plenty of people eat chicken hearts. It's somewhat harmless. But yeah, so that was pretty intense. That's a pretty intense meal to have right before a prophecy session. And probably something you don't want to necessarily replicate if you're trying to do your own prophecy at home. But, pretty metal, I would say. Pretty badass. So I thought I would mention that. That was just kind of odd and ridiculous. Now, when she begins her prophecy, what she does is she's seated above the crowd. So she's either on like a ladder or some type of scaffold, not necessarily a throne, but she would be seated kind of above everyone else. So they could kind of view her and she'd kind of look down on everyone. And a huge component of this prophecy was singing. And it wasn't just the Völva that would be singing. She would actually call upon the women in the village if anyone knew the particular song. So there were specific songs that they would sing to kind of induce this trance-like state. And likely some of the women would know the song, right? Because if this magic is kind of passed down, it's likely people have heard them before. And it was very important to sing beautifully because it was your singing that would convince the spirits to kind of come down and help you in your prophecy. And the idea is probably that they were trying to bring down the Norns or to channel the Norns, right? Because if the Norns know everyone's fate, they're probably the ones you want to channel if you're trying to tell the future. So this song would kind of be part of that channeling process. And there might be drumming along with that, as we mentioned before, possibly an influence from the Sami people. So unfortunately, we don't have any written down records of what this song sounded like or what the words were. How amazing would that be if we did, right? And we could actually sing these ancient songs of the Völva. So we just have to guess. But apparently they were very beautiful and very powerful. And we don't know quite what happens next. As far as I've read in my research, we know she sings, we know she channels, and at that point, it's likely she tells the future. She just talks about either what's going to happen to that village or a particular person who was probably the host that invited her there. Maybe she uses that bag of talismans at her waist as part of the process to kind of help her do that divination. And we do know that, she would give advice and divination to all different types of people, depending on who was hosting her and who was paying her. It was kind of a magic for hire type of situation. So I think that's kind of neat. And we do know also that if there was influence of the Sami were also known to do some astral traveling, and that through their Seidr, through their magic, they would be able to gain that wisdom by sending their astral selves or their spirit self out into the world to find out information and to bring it back. Now, we don't know if the native Norse also did this form of Sami magic or Sami Seidr with the astral self. But it's interesting because so much of modern magical practices also involve kind of sending the spirit self or sending the astral self out into the world to gain information. There's a particular account where a man was given his future by the Völva, and the Völva said, your destiny is to go to Iceland and you will know where you are meant to settle because your talisman, your statue will be there. And he checks his pocket, and yes, his talisman, his statue is mysteriously missing. He's like, where is it? Where is it? And the Völva says, I will astral travel. I will send my spirit self to Iceland and tell you where you are meant to go, where you are meant to find your talisman, and where you are meant to settle. And then they would proceed to kind of put themselves in a tent and go through this trance to kind of send their spirit selves on that journey. And so, yeah, there's kind of like all this different stuff tied into the Sami people in particular and how their kind of version of magic was similar and most likely inspired Norse Seidr, but they kind of had their own way of doing it that is interesting. Let me see. Oh, okay. Great questions. They are coming in now. Casey is asking, oh, wait, didn't they feed the deer the mushrooms? Great point. So this is another aspect of Sami magic. And this is tied to probably a lot of our folklore or stories of like even Santa, for example, and the flying reindeer. I did a video a couple years ago around Yule time, and I believe it's the pagan history of Santa Claus. I recommend pulling that video up where I talk about the Sami people in general and how a lot of their magical traditions is what inspired a lot of the stories we now associate with Christmas. And in one of those, the Sami would feed the reindeer magic mushrooms. And this is getting kind of gross. You would take the urine of the deer because it was kind of like a purified, safer version of the mushroom. It was most likely the Amatia muscara mushroom, the red one with the white dots, and which is kind of dangerous to consume without having gone through this process through the deer. And then you would drink that to kind of enter that state. So yes, it's likely some hallucinogens were consumed. Now, we don't know entirely if they were consumed during this process that I talked about, where they're singing and possibly drumming. We don't have any specific information of mushrooms being consumed for the prophecy. So it might have been more associated with Sami than Norse, but I could be wrong there, or maybe we just don't have the information quite yet. Let me see. Great comments, guys. You guys know quite a bit about this, which is wonderful. Okay, let's see. Ooh, Elva has an interesting comment saying both Tacitus and Strabo mention priestesses accompanying Germanic warriors into battle. These priestesses seem to be similar to the later Völva, so the practice may predate the Viking era. Good point, and very interesting. And it is neat that the Völva, if they are associated with Freya, they might have had a bit of a role as a warrior too. Now, we don't have evidence of that, but that doesn't mean it's not possible. After all, we don't know everything about this ancient culture. And we do know that Völva was an art tied to Freya, and Freya is also a goddess of war, so maybe there's something there. Sarah's mentioning in the comments here that she would love to do journeying or kind of sending your astral self out. I do have a video I did a while ago all about journeying. So I recommend searching that up if you're curious and learning more about that practice. And it's, of course, something been tied to witchcraft forever, and very much even when you get into traditional witchcraft or British traditional witchcraft, which is in an entirely different part of Europe. There's the concept of kind of journeying or hag riding or sending your fetch self out. All of this kind of very similar to this practice that you see from the Sami. Leah's asking, are the priestesses in the TV show Vikings actually Völva? Well, Vikings was somewhat inspired by historical events, but they didn't really have, did they have episodes where they showed a female magical practitioner? I think it was mostly a male. Now, it will be interesting to see the new movie, The Northman, where they have possibly maybe some Norse magic going on there. Just looking at the trailer, it's possible. So it'll be neat to see. Ooh, Graves has an interesting theory, saying, just wondering if the Sami were somehow dislodged by the Scandinavians so that the Völva were the wandering elements of them within the people, so that the Völva themselves were of Sami ancestry. Possible, and interesting idea. I like where you're going with that. Though I would say they had different languages, so it would have been difficult to kind of communicate in different cultures and belief systems. So I don't know. Good point, though. Let's see. Just checking your comments here. Drakara has an interesting comment about the Druids versus the Völva, mentioning that the Druids were both a priest, seer, scholar, and lawyer, and that the Völva weren't necessarily all of these things. Yes, you're right. The Völva pretty much were female magical practitioners. They weren't necessarily taking on these other roles in society, as far as we know. Very different than the Druids, which had a wide variety of roles within society. Now, the Völva was still very well respected in society for the most part, as long as it was a female, not a male. And then I see in the comments they're talking about the new Norseman movie coming out on how Bjork is the Völva in the movie. I'm not sure if is she meant to be a Völva? I did see the trailer and she looks pretty bizarre. But yeah. So we'll see how they approach the whole Norse magic aspect. Let's see, just checking your comments. Okay, we have more information here on the TV show Vikings. Braden is mentioning that Aslog was the only woman to enter a trance-like state in the Vikings TV show when Lagertha tells her she's going to kill her. Yeah, she was probably the most like Völva-like character, but she wasn't a Völva in the show, and that was kind of unusual. Like a Völva was like a trade. It was something you would pay someone else to do. You don't necessarily dabble in it yourself. It was like a whole role within society, a whole job. But good point. You do kind of see a little bit of this in The Last Kingdom, and where they kind of consume the hallucinogenic mushrooms and have, kind of prophecies through that. Not entirely accurate, as well as it wasn't just something you casually did. It was like a whole event. It was a big deal. So let's see. Oh, Drakar is asking, what era are we talking about when we discuss the Völva? So the Viking age is generally from around like 700 to like 1,000. When you get to around 900, that's when most of the people were starting to be converted to Christianity. But this practice probably predates that Viking period, right? It could go way back. And I'm not positive, but I think some of the archaeological sites go before the Viking age. So we're not quite sure when this practice started. So keep that in mind. It was still a lot is being discovered. So, it might change. We might learn more, the more graves we discover down the road. So let me see here, just checking your comments. Okay, let's see. Question here from Never Ending Folklore asking, have you ever seen the Norse Oracle card decks? I think I have seen that. There are a few decks out there that are inspired by Norse pagan culture. Now, if you know me, you know I am a big fan of tarot as opposed to oracle. I actually created my own tarot deck a year ago. I have the link down below in case you want to check it out or get a copy. But most of those are vaguely inspired by Norse culture, and oracle decks are quite a bit different than tarot. Tarot is a specific system created in the mid 1400s in northern Italy with archetypal kind of philosophical and spiritual magical aspects to it. Oracle cards are, I'm going to be a bit opinionated here, but oracle cards don't have a specific system or a specific history. They're kind of just whatever the creator wants to throw together. So I'm much more a fan of tarot, though oracle cards can be just fun and inspirational if you don't want to like dig deep and get weird and nerdy with it. So let's see. Let's see. Good question. Is the Sami culture endangered today? I think in part, I mean, they are mostly caribou herders nowadays, I believe. So it has to do a lot with having big tracts of land to take the caribou to, right? And to sell the meat of the caribou. So obviously that's going to be something interrupted by modern culture and agriculture and all of that kind of stuff. So yes, and it's a shame because it's a super fascinating culture. I really want to learn more about it. There's this interesting theory, which I don't know if this is true, but you know, we had people living everywhere, all across the globe, and then the Ice Age happened, and people moved south. After the Ice Age, people moved back north. There's an interesting theory on why the Sami are so specific and unique in terms of their language and their culture being so different from neighboring areas. And one theory is that they never left during the Ice Age. They actually stayed and survived during the Ice Age. So it's kind of a neat theory. You know, take it with a grain of salt. But, oh, my light just went out. Spooky. So let me see here, just checking your comments. So we have about, oh gosh, this hour has flown by. We have a few minutes left. Now is a great time to ask any questions in the comments if you have any questions for me. If you liked this episode of Pagan Happy Hour, if you like my channel, now is also a great time to do a super chat or a donation or to join my Patreon. That kind of stuff really helps me out and, you know, ensures that I can keep doing this every Friday for you guys. But yeah, as I'm working through the last of my beer here in our last few minutes, let me know your final questions. Did you guys like this episode? Is this stuff interesting to you? Because like researching this stuff has just been fascinating. I'm so curious about these Völva and what they were like and imagining it and seeing how could I at least take some of these pieces and incorporate it into a modern pagan practice. Interesting question here. Heathen Hedge Witch is asking, do you think Freya and Frigg are the same? There are some, you know, people that believe that. And I think they're kind of two different goddesses, but it's possible. So the scholarship is mixed there. Good question. Pete has given me a super chat that says support your local witch. Cheers, or I guess I should say skull for today. Thank you very much. Thank you guys so much, those of you that are enjoying these pagan happy hours. If you're getting value out of them, then I'm doing my job. This is a way for me to use my history degree. So I love researching all this stuff. There's so much we could dig into when it comes to Norse pagan magic. And I hope in a future pagan happy hour, we go over a different form of this. Maybe we go into Norse spells, Icelandic staves, or Icelandic magic. There's a lot of different directions we could take this topic, but I didn't want to go all over the place today. I just wanted to focus on Seidr and the Völva because already there it's so rich with information that we can kind of discuss and uncover and see what messages are there underneath the surface, how we can incorporate some of these ideas into our own practices. So I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah. Oh, super chat here from Wildling Up North asking, hi, kind of new to the community and feel very drawn to traditional witchcraft. Is witch a gendered term? What is a guy witch called? So witch is not a gendered term. If you are male and a witch, you are just called a witch. Now, some men would use the term warlock, but that isn't really historically accurate. Now, there is a term that is historically accurate that most people don't use nowadays, and that's cunning man. The cunning folk or the cunning men were witches, people that practice magic. And a lot of our tradition, what we consider traditional witchcraft, is actually English or British witchcraft from the early modern era. And in that time frame, it was operating within a Christian society, and men were actually the primary magical practitioners. They were called the cunning folk, and they did a lot of magic for their local towns and villages in terms of healing people, finding water or wells, talisman spells, all that kind of stuff. And they were considered the cunning folk or the cunning men. But most people don't use that term nowadays, even though I think it's interesting and it could use a comeback. Most people just use witch. So you're a witch. Let's see. Great question, though. Let's see. Jakar is mentioning the cunning men lurk in every pagan happy hour waiting to be referenced. Yes, that's true. Because I do love learning about witchcraft from that time period, because the vast majority of modern witchcraft comes from the cunning folk in early modern England. So true. Sorry if I keep on bringing them up. Let's see. Oh, I see several of you guys seem to be interested in Icelandic magic as a future pagan happy hour topic. So maybe I'll add that to a poll coming up. And yeah, I think we're about out of time. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. If you did enjoy this, please consider giving it a like, giving it a thumbs up, or subscribing to my channel. I know several of you guys have mentioned that the algorithm makes it difficult for you guys to see when I am publishing videos or doing pagan happy hours. So I guess the algorithm doesn't like me or something, but you can click the notification bell. That can help you being notified when I do these. I do these every Friday at 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Eastern, and I let you guys pick the topic. So every Thursday, I post a poll on my community page with a couple different topics for you guys to choose from. So if you did enjoy this, please consider, helping a girl out and at least hitting that subscribe button. And I want to thank you guys so much. I hope you enjoyed this chat. Cheers, and I'll see you next week. Bye.